Investigators. Today I'm going to be reading you a story from one of our read aloud anthologies. An anthology is a collection of short stories for you to read. The story that I have chosen to read today is called Donovan's Word Jar. Take a look at this picture of Donovan. Donovan likes to collect words. People like to collect all sorts of things, but did you ever think about collecting words? Well, Donovan has quite the collection of words. He thinks that words are very interesting and funny. So today, as I read, there are some interesting words today in our story. One of the words that we might come across is mellow. Have you ever heard the word mellow before? If you are feeling mellow, you are very relaxed and feeling good. You're not worried, you're not nervous, you're just feeling good. Another word that we might come across, or that we will come across in our story, is brim. If something is filled to the brim, it is filled to the very top. Brim. Another interesting word, and this is very, very interesting, is persnickety. Have you heard of persnickety before? If someone is persnickety, they are very picky about what they like. Persnickety. Another word that is interesting in our story, and this is one that we probably practice quite often, is compromise. When you make a compromise with someone, each of you agrees to do something or give up something in order to solve a problem. Compromise. So if you have a brother or sister at home and you both want to play a different game, you might compromise and say, I'll play my game for a little bit with you, and then you play your game, and then we'll play your game for a little while. Another word is perseverance. And this is a trait that we are working very hard for all of us to have, perseverance. It means we continue to do something even though it might be difficult. Perseverance. So we have mellow, brim, persnickety, compromise, perseverance. Those words are going to help us understand a little bit more about our story. All right, I'm going to begin our story, so just sit back and listen. Like most of the kids in his class, Donovan liked to collect things. A few kids in his class collected rocks, insects, or stamps. Some other kids collected coins, comics, or baseball cards. Donovan's best friend Eric collected marbles. But when it came to collecting things, Donovan Allen was different. He had a collection like no one else he knew. Donovan collected words. Yes, words. He wrote his words in purple ink on yellow slips of paper, and at the end of each day, he put the slips in a large round glass jar. Think to yourself, how was Donovan like his classmates? How was he different from them? All kinds of words went into Donovan's collection. He had big words like profound that made him feel smart. Little words like cuddle warmed his heart. Donovan found that soft words like hush soothed his fears. Silly words like squabble slipped off his tongue and tickled his ears. From somewhere he collected hieroglyphic, a strange word that made him wonder. And just for fun, he added strong words like warrior, words that rang in his ears like thunder. Donovan put mysterious sounding words like extraterrestrial into his collection, and there were musical sounding words like orchestral. Collecting words was fun. They were everywhere. Donovan collected so many words that his jar was jam-packed. filled to the brim, almost spilling over with the rim, with words, words, and more words. One Friday morning, Donovan was putting a word into his jar when he realized that there was no more room. Donovan realized that this wasn't going to be an easy problem to solve. Then he remembered that one person who always had the greatest ideas of all. Later, Donovan was reading when he heard his father's footsteps in the hall. He picked up his jar and followed his father down the stairs and into the kitchen. "How you doing, partner?" his father asked. "Fine," Donovan said quickly. Before his father could ask another question, Donovan rushed on. "Can I go over to Grandma's and visit? It's really important." Why did Donovan want to go visit his grandmother? Yep, he thought she could answer the problem that he had. "Okay, but you watch yourself crossing the street in the rain," his dad said. "And Donovan, why don't you ask your grandma if she's free to come over for dinner tonight? Tell her I'm doing the cooking," he added. "I will," shouted Donovan over his shoulder. Donovan pushed open the heavy glass doors to Mellow View Apartments. He smiled at Mr. Bill Gutt, the security guard, as he signed his name in the guest book. Donovan pushed the button and got onto the elevator. His grandmother lived on the fourth floor. Donovan didn't like where Grandma lived now. Everyone there seemed so gloomy. Donovan knocked on the apartment door and waited. When his grandma opened the door and saw him, she smiled. "Donnie, what a great surprise!" Grandma said, opening the door wider. "It's nice to see you. Come in." Donovan set his jar on the dining room table and explained his problem to Grandma. When he finished talking, he sat back in his chair and waited for her solution. Grandma reached over and plucked a few slips of paper from Donovan's jar. "Donnie," she said, "you've sure got yourself a treasure here. This is a wonderful collection of words." Donovan smiled and sat up a little straighter. Grandma's praise made him feel good, but Donovan still needed a solution to his problem. "Do you see my problem, Grandma?" he asked. "I thought of getting a larger jar, but that would only get full too." Grandma settled back in her chair. She didn't say anything for a long while, and Donovan began to feel a little uneasy. Maybe, just maybe, his grandma didn't have a solution. She dipped her hand back into the word jar and pulled out a few more words. "There are some words in this jar that I know folks living here could use," she said. Donovan slipped to the edge of his chair and wondered what his grandmother was going to say. She continued, "Now, I like the word persnickety. That word fits Miss Mary Lou to a T. That woman has to have everything she does just right." Grandma slipped another word from the jar, cantankerous. "That's a perfect word for our guard, Bill Gutt. I bet he argues with flies." "I enjoyed your words, Donnie. I'm sure a lot of people would." She smiled at him and waited to see if he had something to say. "Grandma, I'd be glad to let any of your friends see my words, but they couldn't keep them. I'd have to have them back for my collection." Donovan's voice was firm. "Well, I'm sorry I couldn't help you." "Oh, Grandma, that's okay," Donovan answered, trying hard not to show his disappointment. He did not want to hurt his grandmother's feelings. Donovan picked up his word jar and tucked it firmly under his arm. Grandma walked with him to the door. "Take care of yourself, word gatherer," she said, hugging him close. In the elevator, Donovan thought about his word jar. It had taken months, weeks, days, and hours to fill it. Deciding which words to keep was hard. Then Donovan checked the spelling and made sure he understood what each new word meant. What had his grandma been thinking of? It seemed like she wanted him just to give his words away. He loved his word collection, but he had to think of a way to handle it. Now that it was growing to be too large. So what did Donovan think of his grandmother's suggestion to his problem? The elevator doors opened and Donovan stepped into the lounge. No one in the room was talking to or looking at each other except Miss Mary Lou and Mr. Bill Gutt. They were standing at the security guard's desk arguing very loudly. No one else was paying any attention to them. As Donovan walked closer, he could hear every word they said. "Miss Mary Lou, this lounge will open or close when I say so," Mr. Bilgott said in a gruff voice. "Well, I'm telling you, Bill, that's a mistake. That should be decided by the people who live here," she answered back. "I'm the guard, and I say what goes on in this lounge," Mr. Bilgott bellowed. Donovan looked from one to the other. They both began to shout at the same time. Since neither one was listening to what the other one said, Donovan set his word jar in the corner of the desk and dug around inside the jar until he found a certain word. He tugged Miss Mary Lou's sleeve and then Mr. Bill's jacket. They both looked down, surprised to see Donovan standing there. "I think you two need this word," Donovan said in a stern voice. They both looked at the yellow slip of paper in Donovan's hand. Miss Mary Lou giggled and Billy Gutt smiled. "Well, Mary Lou, what time do you think is a good time to open?" Mr. Bill Gutt asked, scratching his head. "Bill, I checked with a couple of people, and they suggested 10 o'clock. What do you think of that?" Miss Mary Lou asked, smiling at Mr. Bill Gutt. Donovan let out a loud sigh of relief. He had come just at the right time. They needed the word compromise. Miss Mary Lou and Mr. Bill weren't shouting anymore. They were talking to each other quietly. They were coming to an agreement. That sure made Donovan feel good. His word had been just what they needed. Donovan suddenly remembered that his father asked him to invite Grandma to dinner, so he ran back to the elevator and pushed the up button. "Back so soon?" Grandma said, opened the door. "I forgot to invite you to dinner. Dad's going to cook. Do you want to come?" "Well, I certainly do, in fact. Why don't I just get my coat and walk with you?" Grandma suggested. As they walked down the hall, Donovan began to tell Grandma about how he had helped Miss Mary Lou and Mr. Bill Gutt. When Grandma and Donovan got to the lounge, Donovan could not believe what he saw. Grandma's neighbors were up and around, laughing and talking, and they all seemed so excited. He looked around to see what was going on. Donovan saw that they were waving little yellow slips of paper. "My words! They have my words!" Donovan shouted. Mr. Avery was no longer slumped in front of the TV. He was tacking one of Donovan's words up on the bulletin board. Donovan looked over at the desk and saw Miss Agnes digging into his word jar. There were people in a line behind her, talking and laughing. They were waiting to get a word from his jar. "Grandma, stop them! They're taking my words!" He turned to his grandma, but she looked just as surprised as he felt. "Donnie, calm down. They didn't know. You left the jar on the desk." Mr. Crawford, the mailman, passed Donovan and waved his word over his head. "Perseverance," he called. "That's just the word I need. Some days I get so tired I can hardly make it. I'm going to try just a little harder to keep going," he said, tucking the word in his shirt pocket. "Wow, one of my words made Mr. Crawford feel better," Donovan said. All around him, Grandma's neighbors were laughing and talking to each other. They had never acted so lively before. Everyone wanted to thank him for sharing his words. Donovan felt as if the sun had come out inside him. "Looks like we cleaned you out, young fellow," said Mr. Bilgott. "Donnie, are all your words gone?" asked Grandma. "Honey, I'm so sorry. I know you didn't want to give your words away. Maybe you could ask for them back," she said. Donovan looked up at her and smiled. "Grandma, they love my words. The words made them talk to each other." Grandma wrote on a slip of paper. "This is for you, word gatherer," Grandma said, her voice full of pride. Donovan took the slip of paper. On one side it said "A happy accident," and on the other side the word "serendipity" was written. So there were a lot of interesting words in our story today, Donovan's word jar. Now I would like you to complete the next activity, the vocabulary activity that is attached to this story. Have a great day.